I'm Rebecca, and I'm a recovered alcoholic and a recovered addict. What a gift and a terrifying honor to be here with you guys all today. I was invited to speak on steps 8 and 9, which seems like a tall order. And I will just say that I feel like the big book is 500 feet deep, and I'm still swimming in the kiddie pool. So I'm not sure why God gave me this assignment, but here we are, right? Um, a little bit about me. The first time I drank, the allergy was present, right? And I drank until I blacked out and had all kinds of fun and shenanigans, and did that several times and realized that I wasn't really good at that because it made me so sick, and spent the next 20 some years developing a pretty hefty drug addiction and couldn't get free of that. And at around 29 years old, I had my first kid and realized that I had to get away from the dope. And one night I was watching that 70s show, and I was trying to figure out how to be a mom and all the things. And I saw Kitty on that 70s show, and the kids were making her crazy. And she went to the freezer and pulled out a bottle of liquor and took a drink, and she was happy. And I'm like, boom, that's how you parent. And so for the next several years, I got off of hard drugs with alcohol and thought I was a genius, until it started to almost kill me. 36 years old, I cycled in and out of hospitals. Every time I'd stop drinking, I'd go straight to the hospital with DTs. I was in that horrible place where I was terrified if I did drink, I was going to die, and terrified if I didn't drink, I was going to die. And thank God that I had 3 little boys staring at me, because I think, I was that person that was thoroughly convinced if you had my life, you'd drink too. But I had these 3 kids looking at me, and I knew that I had to stay alive for them. So when I found the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I was desperate. I was desperate, and I didn't know how to live, period, and knew I had to stop drinking, didn't want to stop drinking. And I found this fellowship and a sponsor that ran me through steps very, very quickly. I had a full-blown spiritual awakening at 7 months in the program. And a whole bunch of stuff started to happen for me there. A couple of years into the program, I met the love of my life and kind of looked at the program and said, thanks, guys. And I'm going to go off over here and have this amazing life, sober, and got married. And all these promises started to come true for me. Several years into that marriage, I didn't know that I was experiencing something called untreated alcoholism, and I was freaking crazy. And I wasn't angry, and I wasn't frustrated at life, and life was still working for me, but I had switched my spiritual malady into working. I was a workaholic. And I was gripped by fear. Every single day I'd get up and fear would grab me by the throat and say, I'm your driver today, right? And my husband, who is also in the program, we've been together 8 years, and he had relapsed 3 times. And so on this past New Year's Eve, he sat me down and told me that he was in the middle of a relapse and he wanted to quit. And I had no idea. And, it just kind of like knocked me off my feet. And I said, I love you. You're my best friend, but you have to figure this out, because I can't live like this. And then he started sending me these podcasts, right? They're Mad Dog Speaker podcasts. And I'm listening to these podcasts, and I'm like, I've been in AA for 13 years. I've never heard this stuff, right? Like, what is this? And so through that, I started to fall back in love with the big book. And I've had the same sponsor for a really long time, but she knew that I was pretty sick, and she and I agreed that I probably needed somebody else to take me through the work. And so I found a sponsor out of a PPG group out of Webster, she's in Rochester, New York, and she started taking me back through this book. A lot has happened inside of our little town in Kansas in the last 6 months. It's like there's a little big book revival going on. And so we've just got a ton of people tuned in, and we're trying to figure this thing out together. And so when I was asked to come here and speak today, I was like, oh, okay. And so I feel woefully underqualified to do this. But I also know that God sets these appointments. There were several things that I just want to kind of point out that I've come to understand. And I also want to say, I just want to ask for permission that whatever I say today that isn't right, that I can say something different in 6 months, because I feel like, this month I know a whole bunch more than I did last month, and certainly, 2 months ago. And whatever I say today that you can't reconcile in the book, I would just invite you to consider that that's an opinion. And if it's not in the book, that, for me, it isn't really a value for other people. So I'll try and stick to the literature and lay that up against my own experience. When I ran through the steps the first time, I made a list of all persons I had harmed. I became willing to make amends to them all. And I ran out and made all the amends. And then I got into this mindset that I'm so recovered that I don't have to make amends anymore. Like, I don't live my life like that, right? So I hadn't made hardly any amends in years. And then this fear that was gripping me caused me to run. I've done like I've just completed my 4th round of inventory in 6 months, right? And so I feel like I'm awake. I've made more amends in the last 4 or 5 months than I've made the entire time that I was in recovery. And I can tell you guys today that I last week completed the last amends that I can possibly make, right? If I could find the rest of the people, I would make them. And so, the day that I made this last amends, like, it was just this huge spiritual lift for me. I am sponsored, and I sponsor a lot of women, and they sponsor women. And now I sponsor straight out of this book, as I am being sponsored. And so, the sponsor that I have now, she is deeply articulate with the big book. And we were meeting over steps 8 and 9. And she asked me this question. She said, Rebecca, why do we make amends? And I've learned, you guys, to just like not try and tell her all these things that I think. And I'm just like, honestly, I don't know. And she's like, that's a good answer, Rebecca. She said, let's unpack that. Right. And so, what she kind of started to lay out for me is that we make these amends so that we can truly work as agents for God and show that this way works, so that I can be more in line with this God-centered life that I'm trying to lead. And also so that I can show the people about me that, I'm living the program that's been given to us. And so, when I kind of look at steps 8 and 9, now we need more action, right? On page 76, without which we find that faith without works is dead. And so we look at steps 8 and 9. We have a list of all persons we've harmed, and we become willing to make amends to them. It never registered with me before that all the people that are on my resentment list are going to flip over to my amends list. And I'm like, I'm always like, maybe we shouldn't tell the newcomers that, right? That everybody you're pissed off at, you are going to go and sit with and clean up wreckage. And so that was just something that hadn't clicked for me before. And, now I know that, oh, right. Like when I have this really big feelings in my heart about my brothers and sisters, that I need to sit with my creator. I need to acknowledge my part in that, right? I need to get into that 4th column and look for the damage that I've caused. And so the other thing that I probably should have been plainly obvious, but wasn't for me, was that there's some really key words in steps 8 and 9, right? And they're all, the word all. And the other thing that didn't really kind of click with me, or maybe it's something that I had been told, right? I had been told for a long time that I am included in others, except when to do so would injure them or others. And my new sponsor is like, Rebecca, you are not others. Nowhere in the book does it say that. And I'm like, oh, right. And so these were some things that, probably were super obvious to most people, but to me, I needed someone to walk me through this. And so she really took me, she's like, okay, so let's look at what we're trying to do here. Right. And she took me through that paragraph, the 3rd paragraph on page 76. And in the middle of the paragraph, she said, 1, now we go out to our fellows and repair the damage done in the past. That's the first thing. I go out to my fellows. 2, I attempt to sweep away the debris which is accumulated out of my effort to live a life on self-will and run the show. That's the second thing I'm doing. I'm sweeping away, right? Debris. The third thing that she pointed out to me is, remember it was agreed in the beginning that I would go to any length for victory over alcohol. And she took me back to page 58, where it said, and we're willing to go to any lengths. And so, one, I'm going to go out to my fellows. Two, to sweep away the debris and the wreckage that I've caused. And the reason I'm doing that, the why, is because I agreed to go to any lengths, right? When I got down on my knees and I took that third step prayer, I agreed to go to any lengths. Some things that she kind of helped me to see is that, she's pointed out that there's all these promises and there's all these conditions. And so she said, Rebecca, there's a condition when we make amends. And so at the top of page 77, we might prejudice them talking about, we don't necessarily go to everybody and highlight this spiritual feature. But this is not an end in and of itself. Our real purpose, she said, this is why we're doing it, is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. That's why I'm doing this, to fit myself to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. And so, she said, I need to have a sincere desire to right the wrong, that I don't want to be that person anymore. And you guys, for me, that sincere desire, it comes from doing inventory with the sponsor, right? Because I can't see that stuff until I sit with someone and I get into that fourth column and I'm like, oh crap, there it is. Every time, there it is. There's self. That's how it's hijacking all of this. And then I have that moment, right, where I'm like, okay. And I feel this feeling that it's me and I want to be free of me. And in order to be free of me, I got to do the footwork. She helped me to understand that steps 1 through 7, right, are really about self and getting right with my creator. But then I've got footwork to do. The footwork is going out and sitting with people and acknowledging the harm that I've caused. For me, I use amends cards. I am a talker and I want to explain things to people and I want them to know my reasons, right? And so, down at the bottom of page 77, there's some pretty clear-cut instructions about how I'm supposed to make these amends. In that last paragraph, it says, under no condition do we criticize such a person or argue. So when I'm going to someone, like regardless of what they've done to me, I'm not going to criticize them or argue with them. I'm not going to try and explain things to them. I'm not hoping that they will come off of something they've done to me. I'm going in there with a humble heart, ready to just acknowledge what I have done. Simply, we tell them that I will never get over drinking until I've done my utmost to straighten out the past. So that is how I open up all of my amends. Hey, can I make an amends with you? Do you have time for me? She also taught me that it's important to set appointments when making amends. She said, Rebecca, we have run, as tornadoes through people's lives, sober and drinking. And it's important that you ask folks for their time. Let them know what your intentions are and see if they'll see you. When they see me at this appointment, I sit down and I'm like, hey, I cannot get over untreated alcoholism until I do my utmost to clean up the past. I have harmed you by. And she also taught me to really dig deep for the impact that it has potentially caused in someone's life. After that, then I say, do you need to tell me how any of this has affected you? Are there any other harms I might have caused you that I'm not aware of? Because I'm there looking for more data. Then at the end, I say, is there anything I can do to make this right? And I write that part down. And so, when I think about how has this changed who I am today and the things that, and the people who are in my life. And so we have this old deck at our house and I got this idea that we could redo this deck. And so we pressure washed it and this old deck starts to come to life and I get all this stain and I'm staining the deck, right? And my 13-year-old comes out the front door. I'm like, hey, no, bud, go take the other door. Don't step outside here. And he looks at me and his little face he closes the door for a minute and he hops back out and he hops onto the deck and he walks across it. And I just start yelling at him, right? I knew as I'm doing it, like, but I'm mad. Like, why would you do that? He leaves, goes and jumps in my mom's car. They pull up in front of our house and I'm like, hey, bud, sorry I yelled at you, but you shouldn't have done that. Da, 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 da. Right. And I go to bed that night and I'm sitting there and I'm doing my nightly inventory and I'm like, okay, where did self show up today? And I'm sitting with God and I'm like, crap, it was right there. So the next morning I write an amends card to my 13-year-old. And he's on the spectrum and he's a really cool human being, right? Not super emotional. He's kind of monotone. And I say, hey, bud, do you have some time for mom to make an amends to you? And he says, yep, right now. I say, okay. So I pull out the card. Hey, I cannot get over my untreated alcoholism until I do my utmost to straighten out the past. I harmed you by yelling at you yesterday and making you feel small, stupid. I robbed you of your dignity, probably caused you to feel shame. And I want you to know I recognize that. Are there any other harms I might have caused you that I'm not aware of? And he looks at me and he goes, yeah. He said, earlier that morning, you told me to go to grandma's because she had a surprise for me. And when I went over there, all she had for me to do was work. And I said, I recognize that. And I said, do you need to tell me how this affected you? And he said, yeah, it makes me not trust you. And I said, thanks. Is there anything I can do to make this right? And he said, yeah, don't ever tell me that there's a surprise for me again. And so I realized in that moment when he stepped out on that deck, I had injured him earlier and was not even aware of it. And my 13-year-old kid, after I said, I will never, ever tell you there's a surprise when it's just work again. And he gets this look on his face and he jumps up and he throws his arms around me. He says, thanks, Mom. Right. And so that's how this stuff lives out. I can tell you, when I did my first round of inventory, I had this resentment that I didn't realize was a resentment because I thought resentments meant you were mad at somebody. I didn't realize that it's just when I can't get a story out of my head. And I have a gal that works for me. And I had obviously damaged her because the relationship had changed, but I couldn't figure out what I had done. And so I just was, every single day, like in my head, like, it was making me crazy. I'm telling my husband about it. There's obviously damage in our relationship. I've sat her down. I've asked her, what am I missing? We can't get anywhere. And when I sat with God and I was like, okay, what do I put on this? How have I harmed her? Show me the truth. And so when I'm writing that amends card, all of a sudden, all this stuff starts coming out, right? And I don't remember all what was on it, but that I have, basically dismissed her. I have not listened to her. I have powered over her in meetings. And I'm like, okay. So I went to her and I made this amends, right? And it didn't go well. I'm just going to tell you that. Like, I was very surprised by the conversation that happened. And when I got to the part, is there any other harms I've caused you that I might not be aware of? She shared a lot of stuff with me that she needed to share that didn't really track for me, right? And then we get to this part about how do we make it right? And she shared a lot more stuff with me that I felt like I couldn't probably do because anyways, and so I thanked her for that. And I said, I'm going to take this, how do I make it right, into prayer. And I'm going to work on this. But I can commit to you that I'm trying to be awake now to the way that I impact other people. She's not a hugger. And after the amends got over, she got up and just said, do you want a hug? And I am a hugger. And I'm like, yeah, and she grabbed me. Right. And so it was really important for us, for our relationship. But I left there and I didn't feel settled. I had all these names on a list, right? And the last one that I had on that round of inventory, here's another cool thing. So when I first got sober, I was a destitute single mother with 3 kids, right? That had been drinking herself to death, didn't have a good job, was living in my parents' basement. And I had this amazing sponsor. And when we got to the amends part, like I had screwed over a landlord. And I felt like he deserved it. And when I moved out of his house, I just dumped trash in a hot tub that was in the backyard that was his. It was an old hot tub, and I just left it in there. And it's summer, right? Because I was really mad at this guy. And I knew, and I admitted that was harm in my first round of inventory when I first got sober. But, she had decided that because I had 3 little boys, going and making a financial amends to him when I was destitute was going to injure my kids because I couldn't even put gas in the car. When I first started going back through the work this time, all of a sudden I'm driving one day and God just brings me that landlord and that experience and that harm to my mind. And I'm like, oh, wow, there's some old wreckage. The next day, my sponsor calls me and she goes, she said, do you remember this girl that rented a house from somebody and she got really mad at him and she filled up a hot tub with a bunch of trash? And I'm like, OMG. She said, what? I said, I just thought about that for the first time in years yesterday. She goes, yeah, Rebecca, God's talking to me about that. She said, then you were not financially able to go and make that restitution. She said, but you are now. I found out he had passed away. And I knew that I needed to go and sit with him in the cemetery and make an amends out loud. And I knew I needed to do something financially for that. And so she and I agreed upon an amount. And I sat in prayer for an entire week. And then God brought me the way I was supposed to make that amends to one of his kids. So I made the financial amends. I've got this girl that works under me that it still feels weird. I'm not sure if we're settled. My spirit doesn't feel right, but I thought, you know what? I'm just going to keep making the amends. And you guys, I want to tell you, the day that I drove out to the cemetery where he was buried, and I sat at that headstone and I acknowledged the harm that I caused him. And I made the amends to a man that's passed over. And when I got in my car and drove off, all the crazy stories that were in my head about this other gal who I loved dearly that I didn't feel settled about were gone. Just gone, right? I did the footwork. God removed the defect. And so, the amends are our footwork. And I always tell my sponsees, we make the amends because we owe them, right? And this is our footwork where, okay, we've talked long enough about all of our own junk and all the things. And now we go out and we make our demonstration. The honey is in the amends. So I've done several rounds of inventory and I've made a lot of amends and some things that I think are really helpful that my sponsor kind of, pointed out to me from our literature. I work with a lot of women and there's a lot of wreckage in relationships, right? And so really sitting with people, and there's a lot of clear-cut instructions in here about how to make amends. And then there's a lot of gray areas that take good sponsorship and asking our creator, like, what do we need to do here? So, we need to pay back all our money. We need to make amends to all people, except when to do so would injure them or others. I'm not others. And out of the amends is where I think, the strongest spiritual experiences and awakenings really start to cook. Gosh. So, when I think about some other big amends that have happened in our lives, I have this sponsee and she is a firecracker, right? She's super smart and she came in and she did work very quickly. We got her through steps 1 through 7 in a couple of weeks and she is running. And, when I talked to her about, okay, have you made your list, right? And she's like, yeah, I made the list. I'm like, okay, who's on it? She's like 4 or 5 people. I'm like, what? You're like 40-some years old. What do you mean there's 4 or 5 people on there, right? And I'm like, did you pull all the people off of your resentment inventory? And she goes, all of them? And I'm like, yeah, all. That's the key word. And I said, I want you to sit with God and I want you to ask him to show you who else goes on there and just write. And I said, then we will start peeling through these. She gave me permission today to talk about this. Probably, just around a decade ago, her husband was murdered in a nightclub in Colorado. She was there. She saw it. She's been in and out of prison. She's got a little girl. And when she came to me and we started doing this work, she said, I still have all this grief over that. And she, is tearful. And she's like, and I don't know how to get past it. Like, how do I get past all of that? He shouldn't have been there. He was with another girl. It was a mess. Da, 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 da. And I said, I can promise you, my dear, if you do your personal work and you do your footwork, I don't know how, what's going to happen, but God's going to restore that. He's going to help you with this grief. And he's going to help you get out from behind some of your own guilt and shame with your kids and the wreckage you've caused and blah, blah, blah. Right. She talked to me earlier this week. Oh, so then at our town, we have an elementary school. And one day we all get, because I work with school systems, we work on crisis teams. We get this message that there had been somebody that had been doing stuff with their bow and arrow, and they accidentally shot their arrow into the grade school, and it hit a little girl in the arm. She was like a third grader. She's being rushed to the hospital. We're like, oh my gosh, right? So my sponsee's little girl goes to school there. And my sponsee, the little girl comes home that night that witnessed it, and they're talking, and my sponsee says, okay, we need to pray for that little girl, and we need to pray for the man who shot the arrow, right? Because he confessed and all the things. And the little girl, who's probably a fourth grader, said, Mommy, do we need to pray for the guy that shot my dad? So they did. My sponsee starts talking to me about this, like, Rebecca, I'm feeling this need to reach out to him. And she said, I've got questions. And she said, and I feel free, and I don't have resentment against him. She said, I had resentment against my husband for being there and all the things. She goes, but I just feel this need to reach out to this guy. And she said, when it all happened, she said, I talked to the homicide detective, and he gave me information because the guy didn't get charged with homicide. It was self-defense. So anyways, I'm like, well, yeah, if you're feeling that, reach out. So she gets the guy's information and she reaches out to him. And he says that he will talk to her. And she's like, I don't even know why I'm doing this, but I feel like maybe he's burdened with this. Maybe somehow I can set him free. The guy says we find out he actually only lives a couple hours away from where we do. He's in Kansas now, right? And he agrees to meet with her. And he's like, I'll come to your town. I want to sit with you. And then he tells her, he says, I've been in the program for 3 years, and I've been sitting on this amends because my sponsor told me that I couldn't make it to you guys because it would potentially injure you or your daughter. And he said, the other thing I need to tell you is that I've got cancer. They set up a meeting, and he calls back and he says, look, he says, I can't come. The doctor said I'm too sick. I want to drive to you, but I can't drive to you. Can we just do it on the phone? So they get on the phone yesterday, and he tells her, he says, look, he says, here's some details about that night that I don't think you know, and I want you to know. And he said, and I want you to know that I recognize the harm that I caused you and your daughter. He said, I want you to know that I made amends to your husband a couple years ago. And my sponsee said, yeah, I get that. She said, I've learned about making amends to people that have passed on. They talked and they cried. And she got some answers that she had she was okay without, but that she had a lot of questions, and he answered those questions. She calls me at 9 o'clock this morning, and she said, Rebecca, and I said, what? And she goes, he died this morning. I said, sweetheart, do you realize that all of that was for you? You are 70 days clean, and all of this was for you. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, sweetheart, he was going to the kingdom, whether he made that amends or not. He was right with God, and he was going where he needed to go. And I said, but you were his last assignment. So when we have sponsees, right, we have people in our lives, and we're like, and she's got a daughter somewhere that won't talk to her. And I said, I promise, if you do this work out of this book in the way that it says, and you go out once you've gotten free and you go help God's kids get free, God will restore that. He is working on things all the time in the peripheral. So we make our demonstration, right? And we get free. I can tell you that I didn't understand all. I didn't understand that I was supposed to be continuing through inventory. And if people agree with that or don't agree with that, I can tell you for me, I did my first round of inventory 12 years ago and thought I was good, right? I didn't understand how to do steps 10, 11. I certainly wasn't really active in 12. But I finally, after 12 years in this program and the gift of my husband's relapse to bring us the truth, which is given to us in the big book, and a whole bunch of us running around trying to do the instructions, cool stuff is happening. And finally, for the first time in my entire recovery, I do not regret the past, nor do I wish to shut the door on it. There were some things that I did in active addiction that harmed people so deeply that I love so much that I could not get free of that. I did amends to myself. I wrote myself amends letters, forgiveness letters. I sat with God, blah, 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 all the things, these last several years, because I couldn't get free of these acts that I had done. I couldn't. Every time my kids struggle, I would watch them struggle and I would hate myself, right? And I was just tethered to this guilt and to this shame. And my sponsor said, Rebecca, you can write yourself all the forgiveness letters you want. You can sit with God on all that stuff. She said, but if you do the footwork, he's going to take care of those defects, right? God does not want you living under guilt and shame. Stop paying attention to that crap and get over here and do the footwork and go help his kids. The honey is in the amends. The amends we don't want to make, the amends we don't know how to make, the amends we do want to make, right? And I owe people in my life the courtesy of sitting with them and acknowledging the harm that I have caused. They owe me nothing because my Creator takes care of all the rest of it. Our ego wants to keep us from repairing those things. My ego wants to get caught up in the things that I think, right? And that's all horse shit. Sorry, I know I'm not supposed to cuss. That stuff will keep me sick. I can't see it. I need you guys to help me see it. I need people around me who are doing the work in this way to help me see it. I'm a strong person and I'm articulate. And, I need a sponsor who's going to call me on my crap, who loves me enough to hold me accountable to the truth. And the truth is that I have a disease that the root of that is selfish and self-centeredness, and that never goes away. So I constantly have to stay in action through the gift of a program that teaches me about altruism. And for me, I get up every morning and I do the disciplines of 11. I do the disciplines of 10 throughout the day, and I do the disciplines of 11 at night. And I am on this cool journey, right? Or like I said, I know a lot more this month than I did last month. And then I get to watch these things happen for the people around me. The other thing that I'll share, and then I'll kind of wrap up. My husband and I are both we're on this journey together, and it has been so amazing. And God keeps telling me to stay out of God's way and not try and be my husband's sponsor. So I'm just going to put that up. There's still a place of self that shows up that I'm working on every day, right? So every day I get up and I say this prayer, God, thank you for allowing me to let him have his own experience. Thank you for showing me that I never know what's best, and that the more I control, the more self-will I allow, and the less connected I feel to you. So thank you for helping me grow that connection to you by letting go and stepping back and getting out of the way. But it was July 4th, and this kid, we have some Oxford houses in our town. And this kid, last year he was in our Oxford house, and we got close to him. He's one of those kids that everybody just loves, super smart kid, articulate and funny, but he could not stay clean, couldn't stay clean. And we heard he was back in town in one of the Oxford houses, right? It kind of come through the grapevine. And I was standing at my kitchen sink getting ready to take, I was making something to take to this big AA 4th of July party. And I heard God clear as day say, Rebecca, get that kid and take him through the work. If you don't, he's going to die. And then my first thought was, he's a boy. Like, why is God telling me this? And I'm like, and then probably 10 minutes later, same thing, right? Boom, it's on me again. So I call my original sponsor. I'm like, hey, this is what God's telling me. Like, it's going to cause a whole entire, all hell's going to break loose if I help this kid, right? I'm a woman. He's a boy. We don't do that. Da, 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 da. And she said, Rebecca, just pray about it. Right. And I heard he doesn't have long to live. So I didn't say anything to my husband about it. And we go to this event and the kid's there. And I sit down and we're eating and I'm talking to him. And he says, yeah, he said, my old sponsor said he won't work with me until I've got 60 days clean. And like alarm bells are going off in my head, right? I'm like, hey, I said, my husband's sponsor is going to come and speak on Saturday. I said, do you think you can hang on till then? I said, and then, maybe he'll sponsor you. And the kid says, yeah, I think I can. And we get home and my husband and I get up the next morning, we're sitting around and we're doing meditation and kind of just having our morning together. And he said, Rebecca, he said, God's never done this to me before, but he's talking to me and he told me I need to go grab that kid and we need to get him through steps. I need to get him through steps. And I said, here's what he told me yesterday. And we both looked at each other and we called the kid. We said, hey, God's talking to us about you. And he said, you need to go through steps quickly. And if you don't have long to live. And he said, I'm ready. So we brought him out to our house. My husband and I were both on vacation. So, it never lines up like this. My husband works second shift, I work whatever, but we were both on vacation. And so we sat him down and out of the book, we took him through steps 1 through 7 in one afternoon, 6 hours, right? I mean, the kid's on his knees. We're in the fifth step, he's in that fourth column. He's got these resentments that he's had since he was little. And he's like, and so anyways, it was this really cool thing. My husband takes him down in the basement and they do, the secrets. And he goes home and I call him the next morning. I'm like, how are you? And he said, it's gone, Rebecca. It's gone. I said, yeah. I said, you're not thinking about using, are you? And he said, nope. And I said, and you're not thinking about not using. And he said, nope. And I said, well, good. I said, there's more work to be done. We'll be over to get you in about an hour. And we brought him back out, right? Make a list of all people you've harmed. And then that next week, the kid's been to 40 treatment centers, 50 halfway houses. He's only 28 years old, right? He's been in AA for 10 years. I mean, and so we take him the next week and the kid starts running around town making amends like a mad person. Like just, imagine Dr. Bob going and running all over town and making these amends. I mean, this kid has been making amends like crazy. You guys, he has got almost, well, he might even have 90 days by now, but he is running around recovered. He is sponsoring other people. God is on his life. He is it is powerful. And now we've got these people that have struggled inside of our fellowship, him included, and they've got this big resentment against Alcoholics Anonymous because they're like, nobody ever told us. Why weren't we doing it like this? And so then I get to find people like Summer through this process and get connected to cool people all over the world that are doing it like this, that are saying, why did we have a 50% success rate with everybody that walked through the doors in the 1950s? And 25% of the people were coming in that sobered up after a couple of what are we missing? And so we've started line by line book studies in our town with all these Oxford guys. All of a sudden we realized that there's another fellowship that doesn't use our big book. And so we have all these addicts that are in that fellowship, but they're tuned into the big book and they can't talk about the big book in there. And they're not really welcome in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so my sponsee, that's a firecracker, she wants to go into prison. She wants to take the big book. And the other fellowship's like, you can't take the big book into prison if you're with us. And Alcoholics Anonymous is like, you're not an alcoholic, so you can't use us to go into prison. And so she found DAA. And DAA is going to start in our little town like Monday. Like Monday, DAA is going to start. And we got a bunch of addicts that are going to be able to use the book that our creator gave to Alcoholics Anonymous. And we are tuned in to doing the steps rapidly like they did them in the old days. We are tuned into, as soon as you are on step 9 and you're making amends and you are practicing 10, 11, you will be doing 12, right? Because that is 10, 11, 12 are our insurance, right? But you guys, you already know when people get this inside of them, you can't stop them. Like they have to go give it to other people. So I've probably talked too long, but I'm so excited about the harms I'm going to continue to cause my brothers and sisters and the amends I get to make. and the spiritual journey that I get to be on that will help me not die from self killing me. And so thanks for letting me come and be here. That's all I have.